Welcome to the Red Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through our perpetually lefty pinko commie soy boy cuck Antifa super soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate tastes of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. And I've always said that Mother Russia is no match for a USA mommy. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. In 2024, I'm switching it up and I'm taking it back to the basics. I'm a socialist trying to grapple with our world by reflecting on it through art theory and the will of the people. Bitch, I never left, but I'm back at it.
Yeah, we did miss you.
Yeah, there were so many times I'm like listening to the episode, like talking at it. I mean, I do that with all podcasts, as people who have resided in my home can attest. But,
just shouting at the... Yeah. Hopefully I didn't say anything too stupid without you here. So.
You did not say anything stupid. There were a few... statements made that I wanted to contest in general.
Yeah. Oh, was it about Oppenheimer?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I was happy to listen to the...
I thought it was fun.
To the dialogue.
Like, obviously, we both loved Oppenheimer, so it was fun to hear perspectives.
Oh, for sure. That's why I just wanted to argue about it, you know?
Yeah.
But
and normally I'm here for making fun of Robert Downey Jr., which Jack and Daniel both did, but I actually liked him in Oppenheimer quite a bit.
So, Craig, aside from the previous episode, what other pop culture are you getting into these days?
Well, one that I saved to talk about when you were here was I watched one of your favorite movies. I saw Ken Russell's The Devils.
Yeah,
it was awesome. I loved it, and it is like captures the feeling of what it felt like for me growing up in like a Southern Baptist youth group where like everyone's horny and mad that they're horny and are trying to find out who they can blame for their horniness, and it really spoke to me on that level. But it was awesome. I loved it. I didn't realize it was so funny as it is, and like just like
it's outrageous. Like it's just
crazy.
Truly like an outrageous film on every level. The thing that I really love about it is how extreme it is, while ultimately being about some very interesting like structural political conflict. So like the background for folks that have not seen The Devils is in the it takes place in the late 1600s. There was basically an effort to on the behalf of the Catholic Church to consolidate the various churches that were technically Catholic churches, but were kind of had been doing their own thing, right? They were their own little walled-in cities, and their own clergy associated with those specific towns or villages were acting autonomously, basically. And so there was this effort to consolidate all of those,
basically get rid of the small towns.
Yes, and knock down their walls and say like, no, you are part of the Catholic Church and we're going to tell you what the fuck to do. And so that's like the background context that just utter insanity is projected onto. And I love that.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It was cool.
And Oliver Reed is just immaculate.
Yeah, he's great. And I also like that like he basically rouses his town to rebel just because he's like really fuckable, and everyone's like, we're gonna listen to him,
down. Yeah, we're down.
But yeah, and I also want to talk about some wrestling stuff because WrestleMania was last week. Did you watch it?
I not all of it, but I did watch frankly probably more than I did the previous year.
It was a good one, I felt. I just want to highlight a few things. First off, did not like that Stephanie McMahon opened night 2.
Same. I literally, I think I was cooking in the kitchen and I heard her voice and I can't. Boo.
Yeah. I just thought it was like a really cynical way to be like, forget all that other stuff. Like,
right, they're still here.
Yeah. Well, or just like because it ended in like this is the Triple H era, and it just seemed like a really cynical way to be like, forget about my dad. Let me help.
Right.
Like pave the way for this.
Well, like the good parts of it. That's how I interpret. Sorry, I didn't like say a full sentence, but like how I interpret it is like the things that you didn't like about Vince gone. The things that you did still here, baby. Yeah. Like that's how I interpret
she wasn't
it.
One of them. Like the McMahon children, I always hated the McMahon children.
I don't know. I think Stephanie is more well liked than Shane, like long term.
Well, I mean, Shane's kind of
by
a boob.
The universe.
I did like when Shane came out of WrestleMania last year and then broke his leg within like 5 seconds.
Pulled his hammy or whatever.
Awesome. Also, Logan Paul winning. I was so convinced that he was going to lose at WrestleMania, and he won, and that meant KO lost, which was a bummer. But the good stuff, fucking Sami Zayn. I saw mutual respect for Sami Zayn.
Oh yeah,
I was tweeting some stuff on Twitter.
Long term love, Sami Zayn. Sami Zayn, unlike fucking faux ass Punk over here. Who I'm so mad about, by the way. But Sami Zayn legitimately has been dedicated to like progressive causes his whole life. He is actually Punk, and also is Syrian and is very dedicated to the Palestinian cause. I like him a lot. He's hot, and I'm glad that he's on top of the mountain.
Yeah, he's your new Intercontinental Champion.
Yeah.
Also, one that I loved, which I thought was really interesting in the post-McMahon era, was the 3-versus-3 tag match with the team with Jade Cargill, Naomi, and Bianca Belair. For non-wrestling fans, these are 3 like badass black women, and I thought it was interesting because under a Vince McMahon era, I feel like it would have been way more fucked up.
Well, they would have been thrown together because he didn't know what to do with them.
Right. And it would have
That's
been
very
like,
classic Vince McMahon. Put everyone of a perceived similar race together when he doesn't know how else to book them.
Whereas this, I mean, I guess technically, if we want to be technical, that is kind of what they did, is throw 3 black women in a group together, but it didn't play to the idea of like, the thing they have in common is they're black.
That it was a throwaway. Like, we don't know how else to book them.
Right. It was pretty cool.
And I will say, I've definitely talked about Jade Cargill on the podcast before. She started at AEW, All Elite Wrestling. And then when her contract was up, was recruited to WWE. And she is someone that even though I generally don't watch WWE, was very happy for her that was her trajectory, because the style of wrestling that she excels at and is good at and hopefully will excel at with continued reps is a much more sports entertainment model than it is like a brawling or hardcore or Japanese style or lucha style that AEW embodies kind of across the board. And so the big thing about Jade's trajectory is that she signed with WWE, but she had not wrestled yet. She showed up, she talked shit, but she had not wrestled. So this was her debut, and I thought that they booked it really, really well. My issue with her at AEW in her wrestling was always that she was very stilted. Like, she's very athletic, and she is ripped. Like, she looks fucking great. Yeah. She looks amazing. Like, pinnacle athlete. Carved, yes. Like, out of stone. Like a classic old school WWE wrestler, right? Big, beefy, and like ready to kick your ass. Yeah. But she's not fluid at all. She would really struggle with building connection between moves. Yeah. So instead it looked like almost like a video game, like choppy. Do move A, do move B. And she looked not perfect, but a lot more fluid. And I thought she crushed. I thought it was a beautiful debut for her, and that there are some folks for who being around Naomi and Bianca who are very talented and have been in wrestling for a long time, that being next to them would make you look worse, but they're so good at their jobs that they really amplified her and gave her space. Like, I was very happy to have caught that.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It was sick.
The main event, Cody Rhodes winning the belt, which was super fun. We were watching with a non-wrestling friend, and I screamed like 17 times because all that wild, like, just, I don't know, some people might see it as cheap, all the like pop-up celebrities, but I loved it. Like John Cena coming back, and then when the Undertaker came, and then Seth Rollins and the Shield shit. I loved all that. It was fun. It was a good time. Did you watch the main event?
I did not. Yeah. I did not care to. I honestly, I was kind of like, well, I got the Cargill debut. Yeah. Like, I'm good. And again, I'm very mad at CM Punk. Like, I love him. Mike and I went to Chicago to see him come back after not having wrestled for 7 years. Like, when he debuted at AEW.
When he debuted at AEW, okay.
And I like him a lot. He's been known for kind of speaking truth to power and speaking up for labor issues, and all of his recent fuck shit just totally reveals to me that none of that is actually deeply held. It's all just like fucking bullshit. It's all a work, whatever. You worked me, bitch. And I'm mad at him. So there's just not a lot of desire for me to, there's all the political stuff. There's all the McMahon stuff that I had stopped watching for years. And then there's some people that kind of flowed back over from AEW, and he's just pissing me the fuck off. So I'm like, I'll show up for Jade, and that's kind of... Yeah.
I also lost respect for him when my wife told me that the CM stands for Chick Magnet.
Yes.
Which is not cool.
You see those real, back in the day where he's got like long bleached blonde hair.
Total chick magnet. But another wrestling thing is I watched the Bray Wyatt documentary Becoming Immortal, which was like cool. There was a lot of never before seen footage of Bray Wyatt, who, if y'all don't know, I know we talked about on the pod, but he passed away maybe 6, 7, 8 months ago.
Yeah, that's right.
Just of a undiagnosed heart condition. And it was cool, but also the whole documentary served as a announcement of launching one of his characters is coming back, Uncle Howdy.
By whomst?
His brother. So do you know were you watching with the Uncle Howdy storyline? So for those that don't know, Bray Wyatt was this character that he would be possessed by personalities and demons. And the first one was called The Fiend, and it was cool. And it was just him in a mask. But his most recent one was this character named Uncle Howdy, who was still an extension of his mind, but was a whole nother guy that would come out and help him. And he only came out once or twice, and then Bray Wyatt passed. But the end of it is his brother features throughout the documentary, and then at the end, they do a stinger after the credits, which was Uncle Howdy's going to return or something.
So it was an extended promo.
Yeah, which felt kind of fucked up.
Also, I think Bray Wyatt is very much one of those figures that is emblematic of all the things, not all the things, but many of the things about professional wrestling that are fucked up on a worker, on a labor level. Because before he came back and kind of had his final push before he died, I looked up in August of last year of 2023, he had been released by WWE, meaning they let go of his contract for a period of time, and it's just him dying of something that was undiagnosed cardiovascular condition. It's wrestlers generally don't have contracts, they work as independent contractors,
right, and
generally don't have health insurance, and it is a very brutalizing business on your body, and so it kind of makes me sad to hear even it's not the company treated him terribly well, and then they're they're the keepers of his legacy because they hold all the copyrights, and they do the biggest wrestling company in the world,
and came back in the documentary, and they're no one says it explicitly, but the tone is well, WWE kind of being we fucked up, we shouldn't let him go. Which is easy for them to do now that he's dead and beloved. But it was basically his ideas were too creative, and they were trying to pin him in a box, and he got really frustrated, and that's why they left. But I thought the way that they framed the creative differences was kind of, because they would have never admitted that if he hadn't died and wasn't beloved or whatever.
If he hadn't died, and if Vince was no longer in charge, because who
yeah.
was wielding the hammer of you're going to do exactly what the guy say is Vince.
Yeah. Which in the documentary they try to make it seem like it was Triple H.
Sure.
They were because Triple H is interviewed and he's we had creative differences, but we're passionate about the game.
I'm sure, but we all know where the buck stopped, right? How about, seems like maybe you've got some video game news you want to chat about.
So a few months ago, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre video game came out, and I just bought it and I've been playing it, and it's fun as shit. And it's it's just online players. It's you play 7 people at a time, 4 survivors, 3 family members, and you can pick whether you want to be a family or a survivor, or a victim, they call them. But I fucking love Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I was glancing up at my little Texas Chainsaw corner I have in the room where we record. But it's awesome. And I just want to say one of the ways that it's awesome is Yeah, it's not like super strict to the lore of the movies, because one of the things that you do if you're the family member is you collect blood and feed it to grandpa so he can give you like superpowers to hear footsteps of where the victims are. But it's just like hunting them around. But one thing I thought was fucking crazy is they call them the Slaughter family in it, which, I mean, I think in the first movie they never say their last name. So maybe like in the 70s, colloquially, they were called the Slaughter family. But in the second one, they are very much the Sawyers.
Right. I wonder what's going on there.
Yeah,
Maybe they just thought like the branding of it would be
maybe, but I feel like
easier.
I don't know. Because I don't know. For me, like lore-wise, I think Texas Chainsaw 2 has more like lore of the family than 1. But I love it because you also get to play as Drayton Sawyer, who's the one that in Texas Chainsaw 2 wins the chili cook-off with the human meat, which is fun. You can play as the hitchhiker.
Do you get to cook
Nubbins,
some long pig?
I don't know. There is like, so like the levels are like different areas of like the Sawyer family estate. So like there's a farm one, there's one in the house, like, and then it's also underground and above ground because there's like tunnels and shit in the movies. So like there's different levels, and don't know if I've explored all of them yet, because I think the longer you play, like the more shit you unlock.
Right.
But it's really fun. But sad to report, my favorite character, nowhere to be found, and that is Chop Top, played by Bill Moseley in the second one, the one with the fucked up teeth. That's Music is my life. Love him. But anyways, it's fun. It's creepy. It's cool. What about you? What have you been getting into?
So, recently I've seen 2 movies in theaters that have, that are queer in content.
Mm-hmm.
Both of which I loved.
Nice.
The first was Love Lies Bleeding.
I've not seen either, but I would like to see both.
Okay, so Love Lies Bleeding, just really, there is nothing like it. Like, if you are a queer woman that has any interest in like femme butch dynamics, in like gender fuckery, this movie explores that while making a crime drama, a fairly intense crime drama, that has also almost like some magical realist elements. Like, cool. There is a lot going on in this flick. Rose Glass, the director, also made Saint Maud, which is one of my favorite horror movies of probably the last, I think it came out in 2018, so I was going to say 5 years, but I guess slightly older than that. And she's got some wicked shit floating around in her skull, and I cannot wait to see what she makes next. And the performances in it are fun.
Who's the bodybuilder? Like,
her name is Katie O'Brien.
Has she been in anything before?
She's in The Mandalorian.
Oh, just like as a muscle, someone's muscle on the side?
No, she's in a named character. I stopped watching after like the second season.
Yeah, I think I did too.
Yeah. Because as I've expressed before, I have a hard time with TV. Like, once we're in like 10 plus hours, I'm like, I could have watched 7 movies, whatever. But she's in that. Okay. She's in some other stuff as well, but she like actually as a human competes, or used to compete, maybe not now that she's like blowing up a little bit more, but used to compete in bodybuilding competitions. So she like is as ripped as she is depicted. Yeah. Up to a certain point. Some of it is again, like I said, there's some magical realism. Like when they shoot up steroids or testosterone, it's not exactly clear at certain parts. Their muscles like ripple.
Oh, that's cool.
That's some dope. Real funky, interesting stuff that you have never seen at your local AMC theater.
Hell yeah.
Highly recommend.
Have you heard really enjoyed it. Internet newsman Tim Pool's take on it?
No.
He won't see it because neither of the ladies are hot to him. There's a very funny Tim Pool segment of him getting mad at the what magazine was it recently that Kristen Stewart appeared in, where she's like wearing like a jock strap and shit. A jock strap on the cover. Got so angry.
I think that might have been Rolling Stone.
He got so pissed that Kristen Stewart is dressed butch, and he's like, it was.
Maybe Katie O'Brien can suplex him, and we'll combine this segment and the previous segment.
I have a feel. Yeah.
But I can't wait. It's an A24 release, so I'm hopeful that'll be part of the like Max agreement and stuff I was reading suggested it should be out on streaming in July. So
oh hell yeah,
looking forward to viewing it again. I tried to go to see it for a second time in theaters last weekend, and it ended showings the day before I was free. So I was trying to hit it twice. The other queer film that I saw recently in theaters, I saw Utopia's Femme.
What was the first part that you just said?
The Distributor.
Oh, okay.
The Distributor.
I thought maybe we were dealing with a director with a single name, and I
don't know their names, but the direct. It's actually a directing duo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I cannot remember both their names right now, but it's two men. No, Utopia is who distributed the film.
Sam Freeman and Ng Chun Ping.
Yes. And this movie totally blew me back because people just don't make erotic thrillers anymore. And this was a movie that really dove in after those tropes, but made them very specific to like late 20s, early 30s kind of millennial existence. Like the way the kind of stalking and haunting that comes usually right as part of the building of tension of an erotic thriller is like very specifically millennial. And the internet plays very integral roles. The other thing I would say it's kind of analogous to is visually it kind of feels like Good Time, the Safdie's brothers movie, in terms of like the coloration of it, and the fact that it, at least part of the movie, focuses on, it's kind of on the edge of society, gruff white men. But if you haven't heard of this at all, it's about a drag queen who is assaulted in a gay bashing incident by a group of seemingly straight men. And then while cruising, he discovers that one of the people that was beating the shit out of him is actually gay also.
Oh, okay. Who's in it?
So the like racist internalized homophobia, real gruff, kind of ne'er-do-well is played by George McKay, who I know from 1917.
Oh yeah.
He's like the star of 1917.
Yeah.
He's a British. Both of them are British, and have been in a lot of other stuff too. But that's just the thing that I knew George McKay from. And then Nathan Stewart. Nathan Stewart Jarrett plays the main character, Jules. And I know him mostly from Misfits. I don't know if you ever watched that. It was like a British show. I think some of this is just perfectly... The show aired, I think, started airing the year I graduated high school. Oh, okay. So it was like something that I would watch in undergrad. There's not a ton of seasons of it. But it was kind of like if you were into Skins in high school... Then you like watch Misfits. And Misfits is a TV show about like young people that have... They have superpowers of some kind, but they're all like fuck ups.
Okay.
It's like a British teen drama.
Okay.
The guy, do you watch Umbrella Academy, or have you?
No.
Okay. The main other guy, Robert Sheenan, I think is his name, is also on Misfits. Yeah, Sheenan. But Nathan Stewart Jarrett, I know from that. The other guy that's big from that, or that I knew him first, is the hyper-violent, awful guy in Game of Thrones who is like cruel to Sansa.
Oh.
I can't remember his character's name right now.
The castration guy?
Yeah, well, he does the castrating.
The castrator.
Yes, Tariq. Yes, that guy.
I can't remember his name.
That actor is also in Misfits.
Okay, I like him. He's cool.
Yeah, so that it's a fine enough show. I have not revisited it since undergrad, but that's what I know him from. Okay. So it was nice to see reemerge and see him in an adult role, and he carries this movie. So much of it is the tension on his face while he is pursuing or not pursuing his revenge. Really fucking classic erotic thriller on the level of like, it is not a movie that is meant to make you feel comfortable, and you should be disturbed by the tensions held between like desire and destruction. So highly recommend both of those. Love Lies Bleeding and Femme. And then recently, last week, I watched a classic that I have never seen before.
Yeah.
Which is, in retrospect, totally insane. Like, it makes no sense that I haven't seen this movie. So I watched 1950s Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard.
Oh, yeah. One of my faves. I love that movie.
Wow.
It's so weird.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so... I love like a queenie queen, just a diva chewing scenery, you know, making everybody uncomfortable with her delusions.
Yeah.
And I knew that this was going to be in that vein, but I had no idea what was in store for me.
Yeah.
And Gloria Swanson is
so awesome.
One of my favorite performances by a woman ever on screen.
Good. I also love the like switcheroo that movie does, because it does get called film noir a lot. And yeah, for sure. But I think that it starts off really like hard-boiled film noir-y, and then once you really get in the throes of like Gloria Swanson's life, it takes a weird turn where that's kind of like, we roped you in with the film noir, now you're gonna sit and watch like a person kind of crumble and fall apart by their own ego
you're right.
mania.
There is a bait and switch, and that reminds me, I love when I watch a movie and I'm like, oh, all those other things that I watched were referencing this. And I've definitely talked about in the pod last year at some point, maybe about a year ago, my friend Jared and I watched Singapore Sling.
Okay.
Which, prior to me watching that really fucked up Black Emmanuel movie a couple of weeks ago, was probably like the most fucked up movie I've ever seen. And there are parts of that movie now that are made so much more legible by nature of having seen Sunset Boulevard, because it's like a PI stumbles onto an old house that has a mother and daughter living in it who are very like beholden to delusions that are not clear to people outside of them. And Singapore Sling goes in much weirder directions than that. But I'm watching Sunset Boulevard going, that's what this movie is doing. That's like where Friends. This is coming from. Yes.
Got inspiration for that monkey storyline. She has a chimp in Sunset Boulevard.
that is the initial impetus, right, for him seeing her, him meeting her, William Holden. But it had me thinking, because, you know, I love Douglas Sirk movies. I love like Tennessee Williams, like a queening ass performance is like top of the pile for me of a thing that I love.
Oh yeah.
And so I do think Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond is now at the top of that, but I did want to bring up some other like examples of this for me. One that I have been exposed to is Tennessee Williams also. But a couple of years ago, it's a more recent Tennessee Williams viewing for me. That is Katharine Hepburn in Suddenly Last Summer. Very odd movie that is absolutely worth seeing for her performance. It's she is like cruel and reckless, but like very regal at the same time. Then of course, and it's hard not to list 17 Elizabeth Taylor movies here. Elizabeth Taylor also in Suddenly Last Summer, incidentally, but as the foil. The ingenue. Elizabeth Taylor in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. This is a little different queening. She doesn't have the like mid-20th century mid-Atlantic accent and wearing the beautiful clothing. She's screaming. But it is similar spirit. And then I would say one of my other favorites, which again is a little slightly offbeat, maybe from the classic like 50 silver screen model, but will be Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons, where the conniving part is drawn out, but the uniting theme is like all of these women are great with words. They are masters of words, and they wield them sometimes like a shiv, and sometimes like an epee. But I was happy to add it to the list. Do you have any favorite queens?
I was trying to think of the character's name, but and now the actress's name escapes me. So I'm gonna stall while I'm looking it up because I don't know if it would qualify, but Leslie Manville in The Phantom Thread.
I think so. It's like a little more nuanced performance, but to me, Comedian Queen is like, there has to be a little bit of delusion. There's a scale of a little to a lot.
Meets delusion.
Yes, sophistication meets delusion, and like where the sophistication may not, like the internally held sense of sophistication may not be equivalent to what other people's perception of it is, and then like wielding words like a weapon, which she absolutely does, and then like scheming. And again, there's kind of a scale of like being good at scheming and being bad at scheming, but just generally like manipulative on some level. So I think so.
And my joke answer was going to be Eddie Redmayne in Jupiter Ascending.
I have not seen Jupiter Ascending.
It's crazy. He plays like a very like queenie emperor of like a intergalactic of whatever. The movie's so fucking stupid. I love the Wachowskis, but I'm not a huge fan. I respect how wild Jupiter Ascending
straight?
I don't
maybe
know.
I should post that. I'm so confused by Eddie Redmayne's body of work. Like, what are you doing?
His performance is crazy, and like so he like plays this, like I said, very queenie, like galactic emperor who vacillates between talking like this to people and then just screaming at them the entire movie.
Well, this is like, I think kind of on like the male queen side, like Joaquin Phoenix as Commodious.
Oh yeah.
Is kind of, and it sounds like a bad iteration of that, like Eddie Redmayne is.
Yeah, like Jupiter Ascending is wild. Like there is like a part of me that does respect it a little bit because it's crazy. Like Channing Tatum plays a dog boy who can like do like parkour with his space boots and like flies, like zips around. Like,
okay, you're selling it to me. That honestly makes me much more
like
interested.
It's really bloated, and I feel like if they could have streamlined a lot of the like, don't explain so much, just let all the weird spacey bizarre
just let
things
it live as a world building.
Just let it be, and and like maybe trim it down a little bit. It could have been, but it is like trying to be like way too operatic and like too much of a saga that I think makes it kind of dumb. Like do you know what I mean? Like there's like
coloring outside the lines and not in like an artistic way too much.
Bit. And I know there's like heavy defenders of that movie, so which I mean, go for it. You might love it, but I found it. You know,
I have not seen that, and I haven't seen Cloud Atlas.
Ooh, I like Cloud Atlas too.
But I love Speed Racer and obviously the Matrix movies. The last thing I wanted to say in this section is I have started listening to another podcast called Guerrilla History that is
hosted by Jane Goodall. That different kind of gorilla.
Nice. Go Rilla. It's about rap history. It's about Glorilla. But it is a podcast that focuses on history, proletariat history.
Cool.
And people's history. And they have a new series on modern Chinese history. And that's something that I have wanted to learn more about. But, you know, China as a country is very large and thousands of years old. And so it can be a little bit intimidating to know, like, what's the vantage point? Like, where's the entry point for digging into this? And they release an episode in the fall that is like an hour 15 that is kind of like a very zoomed out overview. And then they're doing, I think every 2 weeks, or maybe it's once a week, releasing a 4-part series that now, like currently in April 2024, that builds off of themes, and it's all centered around major events. So the first one was on like the Boxer Rebellion and the Taipei Rebellion. And yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying digging in. I don't have any like, you know, major takeaways yet, but I just wanted to raise it. If you're someone that also really enjoys history like me, I will say I love history, but I sometimes struggle with oral, like either audiobooks or podcasts, because I have no idea. Like, I will simply not remember names and
Right.
things
Yeah,
if I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
see them
See
in
it.
front of me.
I struggle with that too sometimes.
A lot of times. So I've enjoyed listening to this like very slowly and then pausing and being like, I'm going to go look up some of these things now that I have like the names of an emperor or what have you. So I'm working through them very slowly. But if you are also interested, and they have a very several years worth of back catalog, very much, it seems like their perspective aligns with ours. If you generally things we talk about resonate with you, then you may be interested in this as well.
I might have to add that to the list. I told you before we started recording, but I have coming up a combined 32-hour bus ride this week where I'm going to be for a work thing that I'm going to be looking for some sort of entertainment. So
yeah, and their episodes, they're not like hardcore history where it's like, here's one 8-hour-long podcast and then another 13-hour-long podcast.
I remember I listened to a little bit of hardcore history and got intimidated by how long everything was.
Yeah, I like them, but the thing that I really appreciate, and hardcore, like Dan, whatever his name is, with hardcore history, does this too. But it's nice having that one like hour 15 up top that's like, survey the terrain.
Yeah.
Go look at a map right now, just like have a little bit of the aperture zoomed out perspective, and then we'll like go in intensely. So yeah, it's worth checking out.
Hell yeah. Well, let's move on to our current events. What's going on in the world that's either got you celebrating or living in despair?
Well, today we're going to flip the script a little bit because I'm going to talk about a conservative knucklehead this time. So Matt Bruning, are you familiar with him at all?
Just from circles like shit like this happening and hearing his name come up.
Yeah, so he used to be a National Labor Review Board lawyer, and he was fired for saying sassy shit on Twitter, basically.
Right.
But he continues to practice law. He is an interesting figure. Some people who listen to this and hear me say his name are probably going to be mad at me that I'm bringing him up because he's married to a Catholic who is anti-abortion but is a leftist, and so they are quite controversial.
Is it a Red Scare host?
No, though she has been on Red Scare. Her name is Elizabeth Bruning. She's in the Atlantic writer.
Oh, I know who that is.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I like him quite a lot. I like a lot of his he's very data driven. And I like the way he uses data to make arguments for leftist policy building. And so he, acting as a legal representative for Jared Mettello, also known as Jared Monroe.
Also known as Not Gay Jared.
Oh, really?
That was his name when he was on Crowder's show.
So as Craig just gave away the bit, this man, no, it's perfect. That was the next thing I was going to say is that this man was Steven Crowder's former producer for his podcast and YouTube show or whatever. And he, so Matt Bruning filed an unfair labor practice charge against Crowder's LLC for an illegal confidentiality rule, an illegal non-disparagement rule, unlawful interrogation and surveillance, sending legal threats regarding protected activity, and retaliatory lawsuit filing. So when I saw this, I was like, yes, this is like the perfect intersection of our interests. And many things can be said about him, but at the end of the day, Matt is a very professional and extremely diligent troll, using the law and data. So when he wrote in his Substack, which is called NLRB Edge, on April 1st, employers should not attempt to lock down the speech of their former employees for the rest of their lives. We do not live in a feudal society, but rather in a free labor regime where workers are allowed to move between employers and communicate with one another and to the public about the merits of one employer over another. I was delighted. Now, I think I've talked a little bit more on the pod, a little bit before on the pod, about how I think that calling out hypocrisy is pretty politically useless, but it does feel a little good.
Yeah.
Just.
I do also want to add that this is only half of Steven Crowder's legal troubles right now, because he is also named as a co-defendant in a defamation suit where the attorney is Mark Bankston, the same attorney that represented the Sandy Hook families against Alex Jones. And the person who is suing him is also suing Tim Pool. They're also suing Tim Pool and 6 or 7 other news agencies because they all identified him as the shooter in the Texas shooting at that strip mall last year. It was a guy. I don't remember his name, but it's a pretty common name, and they all identified and put up his picture of him, and he's being sued. The other thing I want to add is definitely on Jared Monroe, aka not gay Jared's side in this lawsuit, but also fuck Jared Monroe because he's still, as far as I know, a right-wing theocratic ding-dong. And has done some really heinous shit with Crowder that he's not really apologized for that. Like one of the crazier bits that they did is, you know how Crowder always claims that gay and trans people are doing disgusting shit in front of your children. Well, to prove his point, I guess, they went out to a women's rally one time dressed as trans women, where they were met with love and acceptance by the people at the rallies, which I guess that was an own, and continuously made out with each other. And Steven Crowder had Jared like touch his dick and shit in front of like families. So yeah, he sucks too. To be clear, I'm here for burning down Crowder's LLC. No, I just wanted to add context to Jared Monroe.
That is good context to add. I'm just like, I'm not saying gay Jared. I'm saying fuck Steven Crowder.
He's also the one, I believe, that when Steven Crowder did Cultural Appropriation Week on his show, dressed like a geisha, while Steven Crowder had like Charlie Chan glasses and big buck teeth and a rice patty hat on. So, yeah.
Just men, great Americans filled with impeccable and innovative ideas.
Yeah, so I do like that he is suing him, but I also like when he releases a video saying his life is ruined because of this, and I'm like, well, best of both worlds here, I guess.
Yeah, we win.
Yeah, for sure.
So how about you? What do you want to talk about this week?
Yeah, I wanted to update on something that I know we've talked about in the past. As you may have remembered, in 2022, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, at the height of his cynical anti-trans, anti-woke crusade that pretty much buried his presidential bid while frothing up like virulent, dangerous hogs, passed the Parental Rights and Education Act, colloquially known as Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. The surface level of this bill was meant to forbid talk of gender identity and sex to kindergarten to 3rd grade students, something that wasn't happening to begin with. And the law's intentionally vague language also forbid any education of sex and gender identity that wasn't age appropriate.
Quote unquote age appropriate.
Right, meaning translate as you wish to ban whatever discussion of gender and sex that you don't like. So this allowed bigots in power to effectively wield the law like a cudgel, threatening punitive action to educators who even mention the idea of same-sex couple or transgender identity. Already monstrous enough, the law also jeopardized student organizations like Gay Straight Alliances, which are often the only lifelines that LGBT students have. Well, this week, the Florida Department of Education settled a lawsuit brought on by 2 moms in Florida challenging the Parental Rights and Education Act, effectively overturning the Don't Say Gay ruling. The settlement, this is from NPR, makes it clear that kids and teachers can write and speak about gender identity and sexuality in class discussion and assignments. It also reinstates Gay Straight Alliances and other programs that had been canceled under the law.
Whoop whoop.
Yeah, so we saw in the 2022 primaries and DeSantis' hilarious presidential run that anti-woke political stunts aren't working for Republicans, and this whole bill was fucking stupid from the word go, meant to do nothing but further marginalize the most vulnerable while giving marching orders to the country's most extreme bigots. But I am glad that today students and teachers can have discussions about the real world. And effectively the only part of the bill that remains is the don't put in the curriculum like kindergarten to 3rd grade about sex and gender identity, which wasn't in the curriculum to begin with.
Yeah, we live in Florida.
Yeah, so it was effectively there is a bill still, the Don't Say Gay bill, but the especially heinous shit has been stripped out of it now. So so that's a rare win in Florida.
Is. It's good to have some locked in, to reflect on.
Yeah. Well, are we ready to get into the movie of the day?
Yeah, let's do it.
Hell yeah. Well, we are going to start a new series, and a 3-part series that we've dubbed The Reds, White, and Blue, where we examine how the Soviets, the Chinese, and the unnamed lurking Red Menace are conceived of, built up as a threat, and ultimately defanged and lampooned by the Western imagination. We will be covering The Manchurian Candidate, the 1962 version, today, and then Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 1978 version, in 2 weeks, and finally the more contemporary film, The Death of Stalin. But for today, we're going to contextualize the first film, in our initial discussion by digging into the Red Scare and its impacts pre-1962, when The Manchurian Candidate came out.
So, in American political culture, we tend to use McCarthyism as an all-encompassing term to refer to the Red Scare. But the Red Scare extended far beyond Mr. Joseph McCarthy's 4-year reign of accusations and congressional hearings, though, of course, we'll touch on his foolishness, too. To be a full breadth of informal and formal policies that treated the quote-unquote communist as an invading interloper, tricked, tainted, and trained by the Comintern, the Communist International, a congress of communist parties and organizations from around the world. And the Red Scare was intended to control and root out traitors. We might think of the Red Scare as the home front of the Cold War, in which political repression and weaponized fear strove to crush dissent and fracture organizing networks. The Red Scare was targeted to weaken the capacities of existing communists, but also nip developing and future consciousness, preventing the American proletariat from seeing how their struggles related to the socialist, anti-imperialist, and national liberation fights taking place around the world and mobilizing around those same principles.
The stage was set for the Red Scare by the anti-labor sentiment and policy of the late 19th century and very early 20th century, but the global conflicts, shifting alliances, and collapsing colonial powers of the interwar period activated the lights and launched the full play act. There were a series of closely related laws intended to keep tabs on people and organizations who had relationships with other countries outside of the U.S. The Foreign Agents Registration Act of 1938 required that people representing foreign interests by lobbying or advocating on behalf of foreign governments or organizations register with the DOJ. This was initially intended to address Nazi propaganda that came through customs, but quickly fascist and communist activities became its focus. The Smith Act of 1940, also known as the Alien Registration Act, but repeatedly called the Thought Control Act by socialists and newspapers we read from the 50s and 60s, made it a criminal offense to advocate for the violent overthrow of the government or to be a member of any group committed to such advocacy. And the Voorhis Act, Voorhees? I wanted to say Voorhees, but I said Voorhis. The Voorhis Act of 1940 required registration with the Attorney General for organizations whose purpose was to overthrow the government. Anti-communism was a virulent and many-headed beast. It grew through lawmaking and clandestine surveillance, but also through public congressional investigations. On the House side, we had HUAC, the HUAC, and on the Senate side, we had McCarthy.
So, established in 1938, the House on Un-Americans Activities Committee, HUAC, was an early adopter of the anti-communist madness. In 1948, the chairman of the committee, J. Purnell Thomas, wrote to President Truman saying, "I shall continue to expose the participants in this communist conspiracy, whether they be government employees, scientists, diplomats, labor leaders, or movie stars." I highlight this because it's a little bit of a curious situation in which there's some disagreement between American political elites about how to tackle the quote-unquote threat. In this letter, Chairman Thomas castigates Truman for undermining their investigations, following Truman's attorney general making public statements criticizing the investigation of atomic scientists. Thomas wins out, though. As we know, HUAC doesn't relent. Later in 1949, the committee was doing things like demanding schools submit list of textbooks. Where have we heard of that recently? And ask for loyalty oaths from university faculty before fully becoming the House equivalent to McCarthy's Senate committee in the 1950s. Now, Truman was no friend to communists. It seems his critiques were politically motivated, and they were about HUAC disrupting the U.S.'s nuclear program. As in 1947, he signed Executive Order 9 9835, a loyalty oath order for all government employees.
Always good when you get one of those.
Right. Yes. And then McCarthyism launched when in 1950, Senator McCarthy began to hurl accusations that the State Department and other federal agencies were harboring hundreds of communists. In a speech to the Women's Republican Club in West Virginia, he said, "Today we're engaged in a final all-out battle between communistic atheism and Christianity. The modern champions of communism have selected this as the time. And ladies and gentlemen, the chips are down. They are truly down." He utilized his chairmanship of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation, say that 7 times fast, to host hearings in 1953 and 1954. According to Senate records that were finally made public in 2004, 160 closed sessions were hosted during that time period in which 395 witnesses were questioned. To be clear, his career ended not because of a principled uprising against his life-ruining campaign, but because he overplayed his hand and began pointing fingers at supposed communists in the army. He expended all of his political capital and lost credibility. No one was willing to support him. So again, here, I want to call attention to this minor theme of conflict between American political elites undercutting anti-communist efforts, at least temporarily.
Also, right-wingers will always inevitably turn on themselves and crush themselves with their own stupid weapons.
We like to talk about the internal contradictions, right? Coming to bear.
We mentioned before that existing labor strife and law laid some of the foundations. No coverage of the Red Scare would be complete without examining the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947, the non-communist affidavit provision. Section 9H said that the NLRB would not investigate any claims raised by the union, consider any petition for a union, or hear any unfair labor complaints if the union has not filed a non-communist affidavit for every officer of the specific chapter and the national international organization. These were not repealed until the Landgraf-Griffin Act of 1959. Building off the Surveillance and Registration Acts of the 40s, in 1950, the McCarran Act was introduced, requiring communist organizations to register with the Justice Department through its Subversive Activities Control Board, or SACB. It also made it a felony to contribute to the establishment of a dictator in the U.S. and allowed the president to arrest and detain people who he believed were engaged in spying. In 1964, the Supreme Court declared denying communist group members passports was unconstitutional, and in 1967 said that an individual who was indicted because of his membership was denied First Amendment right of assembly, though neither of those decisions had occurred yet at the time this movie was made. The board eventually ceased all operations in 1973. The Red Scare penetrated cultural institutions too. The blacklist started in 1947, when movie executives fired 5 suspected communists, and it only grew from there. The accused were expected to participate in HUAC proceedings and point fingers at others or risk their careers.
And now that we have some idea of the forms that the Red Scare took in the United States, what was at risk for socialists and communists? Well, we know that it undermined organizing. For example, the Daily Worker, which was the Communist Party's daily newspaper in America for decades, was shuttered in 1958 due to the increased cost of production because on every level, their readers, their printers, their distributors were being aggressively harassed. We also know that the Red Scare restricted the movement, speech, safety, and financial security of individual activists through deportation, harassment, imprisonment, legal battles, and even death. I want to highlight a few examples I found in primary sources from the time. So, in 1960, the Young Socialist newspaper, which was published by the Young Socialist Alliance, I learned about a situation where nearly 70 students were arrested, and one was charged with felonies during the course of a HUAC protest that turned into a cop-initiated riot. Though the student Robert Meinsbach, who was charged with felonies, was ultimately acquitted, it led to a very odd situation where HUAC produced a 40-minute documentary called Operation Abolition that totally inflamed the situation. They were going around to college campuses and playing this documentary, trying to be like, your fellow students are communists. And there were records of journalists lying on behalf of J. Edgar Hoover, who tried to push a pamphlet called Communist Youth, Communist Target Youth, Communist Infiltration and Agitation Tactics to try and railroad the the protesters. I saw the musical The Producers the day before yesterday, and obviously that is in my brain. Also, in a 1961 issue of Political Affairs, which was a publication of the Communist Party USA that started in 1944, a socialist named Elizabeth Gurley Flynn writes about the impact of the Smith Act that Craig had talked a little bit about a few minutes ago. She notes that 131 people were charged under the Smith Act in 1948, and that 7 of those people were still under bail and travel restrictions in 1961, and that their trials had not taken place. They were not convicted of anything. She also talks about the 6-year prison sentence that was faced by Communist Party leader Junius Scales under the Smith Act following the rejection of his final appeal by the Supreme Court in 1960. She notes that the federal prosecutor refused to reduce the requested sentence because Scales was seen in the presence of communists at a fundraiser to raise money for his legal defense. I also read an oral history by Ruth Young Watt, who was the chief clerk of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations from 1948 to almost 1980, which is so crazy that they didn't clear house. Right? It's like, y'all were doing this horrible stuff with McCarthy. Sure, worked there for another 30 years. And she described the case of William Remington, who was an economist for the Commerce Department, who was accused by another targeted alleged communist. So classic, you go in front, you have to name names, right? This woman named his name during a hearing and said that he shared information on war production levels with the Soviets during World War II. And in 1953, he was convicted and sentenced for perjury during what he had said in response to when he was called in to, confess. And he was murdered in prison in 1954. So during the Red Scare, Americans were investigated, punished, and even killed, trying to stop the march of history. The repressive efforts and the movie we're about to discuss assume, at least superficially, that this required some level of infiltration, right? That the Soviets, that the Chinese are coming and poisoning the minds of young people. But Milton Howard, who was an editor of the Daily Worker, like I mentioned, a Communist Party daily newspaper, had this quote in a November 2nd, 1947 edition that I wanted to read. He said, "You have to have a poor opinion of the American people if you imagine that all other nations can develop the idea of socialism. But our people have to import it."
That's good. More like the Daily Woker. But no, I think that was good to kind of establish that, because I know, especially this movie, but the movies we're going to talk about are pretty fun, and I think it is important, like, while still wrestling with the idea of like the Red Scare, but I think it is important to really cover like the lives that were irrevocably fucked up under like the Red Scare and the persecution of them. But yeah, we ready to dive into the movie?
Yeah, let's go.
Hell yeah. The Manchurian Candidate opens in Korea with a platoon of American troops drinking and partying in a Korean bar. Sergeant Raymond Shaw, derisively referred to as Saint Raymond by another GI, breaks up the party to lead his men back out on patrol. Included in the platoon is Major Bennett Marco, played by Frank Sinatra, and Chunjin, the platoon's Korean guide. But under the cover of darkness, the platoon is ambushed by a squadron of Russians, incapacitating the American GIs and loading them up onto helicopters. Cue the opening credits. When the credits finish, we see the members of the platoon returning home as heroes of the Korean War. Sergeant Raymond Shaw, played by Laurence Harvey, is singled out for his bravery and given the Medal of Honor. But something seems off, with Sergeant Shaw especially, when all the members of his platoon, who don't seem to like him that much, all describe him in the exact same way. Each man repeating verbatim, "Sergeant Shaw is the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life." Upon returning home, we meet Sergeant Shaw's mother, Eleanor Iceland, who's married to the moronic and simple United States Senator John Iceland. But Eleanor Iceland is the yin to his yang. She's a ruthless political operative, the man behind the curtain, helping her rather simple husband navigate the treacherous waters of his political aspirations. Playing Eleanor is Angela Lansbury, who is fucking terrifying, melting characters with withering glances and pointed criticisms. Eleanor Iceland's primary tool in helping her husband's political ascent is declaring his rivals, specifically those in the Department of Defense, as communists. So that's the like first 10-minute setup of the movie, and I was all in from there. Like, I feel like this whole movie is pretty lean in storytelling, but I feel like the first little bit sets everything up so perfectly that I don't know. I was ready to go. Like this movie moves and is like has thrills in it. I like this quite a bit. What did you think?
Yeah, I liked it a lot too, and something I know we don't always talk necessarily as much about, like filmmaking decisions, but the direction in this movie is fucking sick.
Yeah.
There is like Dutch angles. There is at the very beginning when they're in Korea, and it's something that's repeated several times, someone in aggressively out of focus in the foreground with the mid
action
and background and the
yeah.
action in the background in focus. And that's, again, we see that in Korea, but it's repeated elsewhere. There's a lot of like creative framing with people through, windows, doors, etc. So I liked how splashy it was. Like, I really like when something, it's a good movie, that, like you said, is lean and tight and pretty fast, but is well directed. Like, there's a version of this movie where John Frankenheimer, I think is his Frankenheimer, is not directing it, and it's just a little stiffer. Yeah. It's directed in a straight down the line fashion, and so for me that's what really sold it. And
Frankenheimer was like, his reputation has always been like, first off, he worked in action movies a lot in like 50s, 60s, and 70s, and always been like a kind of workhorse workman director, like
like a journeyman.
So much so that somehow I feel like this movie comes up on every podcast we do. But I have a perverse fascination with the 90s Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yes.
And I've talked about the making of on that documentary, The Island of Lost Souls. Well, when Richard Stanley got fired off that and it looked like complete bullshit, like they went out and hired John Frankenheimer to finish it, specifically because he has a reputation of like just getting shit done and keeping it trucking. Yeah, not that movie was good, but like it wasn't necessarily his fault.
Right.
Yeah.
He directed Seconds, right?
I believe so. Yeah, he has a lot of shit. Iceman Cometh was a big one. He did the French Connection sequel. Yes, he did direct Seconds.
It's it's, I think it's just, I appreciate it because I think sometimes the conception of like, oh, the journeyman who shows up and executes what is needed, it's like that can still have visual flair.
Sure. 100%. Yeah.
And he definitely brings that to the table. Also, I won't go fully into it right now, but to foreshadow a little, the ending of this movie makes the meaning of whatever is happening during it totally, it just like throws it for a loop.
Yeah.
And I kind of love that.
I love that too, because I guess my perception of this movie was, I had never seen it before, and I always thought like, I knew it was held up as like a good political thriller, but I always thought that the end message, and one of the reasons that we picked it, was that like communists are the communists are the ones who will infiltrate and kill us all. And I think this movie inverts that quite a bit by the ending.
Yeah. Or it at least is like, that's not the ultimate villain. The ultimate villain, mean mommy.
Yeah. Hell yeah. And she is so, like, the cast is really good in this.
Yes.
But Angela Lansbury is so fucking creepy.
What did you think about Frank Sinatra?
He's okay. I mean, he's like, he's the like everyman that wanders around and goes, what the fuck's going on here? So I don't feel like he has as much like emotional complexity as all the other characters, because he doesn't have to. He's the one like trying to put the pieces together or whatever. Right.
He's the foil. He's asking questions so that the other players can I didn't knock it out of the park.
I mean, obviously I think the standout is Angela Lansbury, who's fantastic. But yeah, he's good in it. I don't know how many Frank Sinatra films I've seen.
I think this is the first for me, and I did not know that he was in it until I started watching it, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
It's also, him in it is this kind of funny like reflection on things that have changed over time, because it's like he as we know, right, he was a boozer, a womanizer. He was like living a life. And you can see it on his face. He does not look like someone that would be on a battlefield at all.
He looks old.
He looks old. That's what I mean.
He's not like, that old. Like he's
no, he looks a little rough in this movie.
I'm gonna look up how old he is when this comes out, because he was born in 1915, so he was
I am
God,
so
doing
bad
math, I
at
know.
mental.
Shit.
Yeah.
He's not 50 yet.
62 minus 15.
Yeah, he's not 50 yet.
Yeah.
But he looks old as hell.
He looks quite aged.
Because I would have guessed like close
to
to 60, but I know he died in the late 90s, and he couldn't have been over 100 years old when he died.
So it was just kind of cracking me up because it is one of those things about, as time has marched on, it's like teeth are a great example of this. It's just like nobody has normal teeth in movies anymore. Everybody has fucking chiclet, horse, terrible veneers. And it was one of those where I was like, this man was so famous, well-liked, charismatic that they were like, absolutely, buddy, put him in the fucking movie, even though it makes no sense.
And his ass was identifying some communists back in his day.
I'm just saying.
I don't know that for sure, but just I do know that he threatened to. He said he would punch Sinead O'Connor in the face when she tore up that picture of the Pope. So I'm certain he was looking for commies in the 50s.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. I'll have to dig back into some of those primary sources.
I feel safe. I feel safe.
Oh yeah, I'm not. Yeah. I'm not saying that. I mean, like, mayhaps we can find proof.
Yeah. But yeah, so as the movie goes on, we see that Frank Sinatra's character is having this recurring dream, and that dream sequence is fucking cool.
Yes, it is.
I like that because it doesn't hold your hand. It's confusing as shit when you first see it. So he's having this dream sequence where he's at like a flower club, basically. With,
a garden club. Like
a garden club with like neighborhood wives, where him and his squad members are like put on a stage and kind of being like, I don't know what, they're like examined, like lauded for their work, but then it's cutting back and forth between the squad members and the exact same stage setup, but in front of a bunch of Russian and Chinese, like, it's like dignitaries, diplomat, like whoever.
I mean, I think it's supposed to be the Comintern, essentially, or some, international committee of communists.
Yeah, and we see that what he is experiencing is he's reliving the brainwashing that him and the squad, when they went missing for how many ever nights in Korea, they were captured and brainwashed. And I guess my wife and I, when we were watching, we're trying to interpret it. Is it meant that when they think about it, they're supposed to, any loose memory of it is supposed to be supplanted by that of a garden club meeting? I
think so. It's just a forced replacement memory.
Right. I didn't know if that's what it was or if it was just like weird dream logic that he was like trying, but it is really cool. And it's
I love those scenes.
And it's fucking dark too, because we see that they're all being brainwashed to basically do the commies bidding at a moment's notice. And the first thing they tell him to do is to strangle one of his squad mates, and he just dead-eyed Shaw, that is the returning hero, just dead-eye strangles a dude and then shoots another one. They're like testing to make sure it works. Like, that whole sequence was creepy as hell. And I like that you just don't know what's going on yet. Like, you're thrown into this.
Well, and there's like some blurring, because it's like sometimes they're in the garden and they see each other as women, basically. And then sometimes they're in the, like, this International Communist Committee meeting room that has like giant portraits of Stalin and Mao and like other people on the walls. And then sometimes they're like in that room, but there's flowers there. It's like there's like the bleeding between
it's really cool.
The two kind of enmeshed together.
Yeah, I really like that. So Sinatra, that is, starts to get a little suspicious and starts asking around. Actually, let's talk about the solitaire, because I really like that too. We see Shaw living a life of he's struggling basically when he gets home. He hates his stepdad, obviously has a complex relationship with his mom, kind of just wants to be away from them. And
they seemingly want to use his newfound war hero fame to assist the senator's re-election campaign, and he is highly resistant of being utilized in this fashion.
Yeah, and all the while the senator is also pushing for a vice presidential nomination in the upcoming presidential election. But we see the first scene where we know some shit's going sideways is, I believe the first time, is he gets a call from someone, and the call says, "Why don't you pass the time with a game of solitaire?" And that immediately sends him into like a trance where he starts playing solitaire, and every time he hits the queen of diamonds, I guess that's his programming that makes him adhere to whatever command he hears next.
Is said next,
yes.
Yeah.
Which results in a really funny scene in halfway through, which I really like. But yeah, I think that's really cool. Actually, we'll talk about that one because that's my favorite one. Is we see like early, like they're testing the sequence, like giving him the command, saying what it does, and then he walks into a bar where Frank Sinatra is, and the bartender just happens to say like, "Hey, you can play a game of solitaire." And he does, and he gets the Queen of Diamonds.
And he just walks out of the bar.
Because the next thing the bartender says is to like somebody else, like, "Hey, why don't you go jump in the river?" So he jumps out, he walks out of the bar with Frank Sinatra following him, and just watches him walk into the water. And then there's a great moment where he like, I guess, comes back to, and is just in the water and
he's
doesn't
like, why
really know
am I wet?
Yeah, shit. Yeah, there's so much like weird. I love how little it holds your hand, and it's just one of those movies where like you see all the pieces moving early on, even though you don't know what they mean. And I could just feel like, oh, this is gonna, like the lean storytelling, I can feel like all these pieces are gonna click in a very satisfying way.
It just wants you to be on for the ride instead of like overly explaining, providing a roadmap.
Yeah. I do have one thing. What did you think of the Janet Leigh character?
That I assume is just purely a Frank Sinatra, like Hollywood. The ladies want to see Frank Sinatra with a lady. I do enjoy Janet Leigh. I mean, I've mentioned earlier in this episode, I love a Tennessee Williams flick, and she is in my favorite of all of them, A Streetcar Named Desire. So I like her fine, but it just reads to me like stick some romance in there so that he has an opportunity to schmooze on screen. I do like their banter, and that their banter is kind of classic 1940s fast talking dame. Like they're just kind of quick fire, snappy repartee. But I don't know that it is adding to the movie. It's the
only element I feel that doesn't serve a purpose in the movie other than the banter and the like getting to see both of them being charming or whatever. Because the whole time I was like, well, she's gonna have some like,
right.
She's the handler.
I thought she was the handler.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. We didn't mention that the entire time we hear that Shaw under mind control has an American handler. And that kind of plays out to be the mystery of the movie of who his American handler is.
So I guess there's that. Like she presents like a counterfactual, right, or like a different like bunny trail to go down. I do think there's also something interesting that's not a fully formed thought, but like as we'll get to, there's a lot of like interesting Freudian gender stuff going on with authoritarian mommy, and Janet Leigh's character is very self-possessed, is not asking, and in fact rejects Major Marco, Frank Sinatra's character, attempts to like kind of control her and her life. Instead, it's much more if she kind of blows in and out of scenes with him and shows up when she wants to have a good time, and is very gentle and assertive and self-possessed. So I wonder if there's like something there. Like it's interesting that the only two women that we really see in the movie that have like are speaking frequently are like her, extremely self-possessed and kind of going her own way, and smart and able to kind of compete conversationally with Frank Sinatra, and then like totally overbearing, domineering, vicious
opposite
mommy. But it's all like none of them are like wearing apron making cookies, which is interesting for a 1962
with Frank
film.
Sinatra in it,
right?
So we really start to like we start moving in the plot when Chunjin shows back up, who is their Korean guide who... Yeah,
he was like a translator and a territory guide who led them astray into the trap.
And I think we're supposed to think at the beginning... I don't know if they ever say it at the beginning, but I think we're led to believe that he might have something to do with it. Or maybe
he for sure did. Because he leads them...
I know he did, but does he say... Do we see that at the beginning? I don't remember.
I mean, he goes... when he's leading them, and it's one of those shots where again he's in soft focus in the foreground. What he's having a conversation back and forth with Major Marcos, where Marcos like, no, strategically I'm not going to do what you say I should do, and he's like, no, you should do it, and then they do what he says, and then they get caught. So
well, he shows back up as basically a valet and a cook for Shaw, who does not remember him. And then there's a really cool scene where Frank Sinatra goes to knock on his door and sees him, and just like no words, just instantly
tackles
like,
him,
fighting. And then a chase sequence, which
and they smash up like the whole room.
Yeah, it was cool. Like it was a pretty good fight scene for the 60s, and it was a good fight sequence. And then that's when like the movie does start to kind of like coalesce around the major plot point in that. I mean, do we want to give it away now?
Oh yeah, give it away now.
I was just watching something with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I don't know what it was.
Oh, I'm sorry. Someone I dated once told me that they viewed the Red Hot Chili Peppers as the Bob Dylan of our generation. Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I saw. Okay,
we're not dating anymore.
This is a tangent, but the comedian. Greg Turkington.
Yes.
Neil Hamburger is his persona. Who,
yes.
For those who don't know who he is, the persona is like a shitty alcoholic, 1950s club act who's just like mad at everyone and has really bad jokes. But I saw him live one time, and literally 50% of his jokes were just shitting on Anthony Kiedis. Like he would just come back to it. To shit on him for no reason. And my favorite one, and it's really gross, I'm sorry, but I'll say it, is he goes, it was a complete non sequitur. He goes, anybody know why Anthony Kiedis went under the bridge? And there's a big silence. He goes, because you're just a plate of shit he wanted to jerk off on. And then just next joke. Nothing to do with it. It was just so funny. Like,
I feel like there's two options. Either they are close friends,
or
he really hates him. Like he fucking knocked a plate of Coke out of his hand or something.
It was just one of those things. Like the more jokes he did, the funnier it became. Just because like of that, like he either hates him or they're friendly. But it was really, really funny. Just the non-stop Anthony Kiedis jokes. But yeah, so to dive into the spoilies is that we learn that his American handler is in fact his mother, who is essentially using him to further her husband's political aspirations. And we see that at a costume party. Did I miss something before the costume party?
No, I mean, we learn that that essentially Angela Lansbury's character has interfered in her son's life on every step of the way,
including with his love of his life.
Jocelyn Jordan,
who is the daughter of Angela Lansbury's main political rival, Senator Thomas Jordan. And has she's been a controlling presence in his life, basically all his life. So yeah, he's coming home and he is trying to get acclimated, and then he ends up going to a costume party where he is reunited with Jocelyn, his fling that his mom made him basically break up with. And she's wearing a costume. I kind of like that.
I loved this.
Yeah, she's wearing a costume that is the Queen of Hearts. Which, does anyone tell him to play solitaire before?
His mom does.
She's going to activate him to do something.
Yes.
And before he can get to the Queen of Hearts in his solitaire game.
Yes, Jocelyn or the Queen of Diamonds. But Queen of Diamonds, Jocelyn sneaks in through the side of the office where he is sitting and playing solitaire, and then looks up and
wearing a Queen of Diamonds costume, thus making him making her next suggestion, I guess, his fortune.
His Bible. So,
yeah. And they elope. They are just gone and married. And I don't remember. Do we see it? I don't know if we see it.
No, we see them kind of jaunting about, but we don't he disappears out of frame. For
he's gone
a while,
for a little bit. And that's when her plan comes more into focus, which is the the Republican National Convention that's coming up.
Yeah.
And her husband is going to be the presumptive VP, and we see her making moves to get the presumptive president out of the picture, thus rocketing him into power. And I'm sure everyone who hasn't seen it could guess the plan is to brainwash her son into assassinating the president, thus making his stepfather presidente. I don't know. I loved all that shit. It was like, I don't know. I just love what the pieces are so intricate and moving the entire movie and then just coming together. I don't know. Before we get into the climax, what do you think of all the intrigue?
Yeah, I like that. And maybe this does kind of speak to like the role of Janet Leigh and Frank Sinatra's thing is like, it is kind of nice that there are these moments of like love that are the exception to what else is going on. So when Shaw and Jocelyn like kind of depart, and I think we see them like speaking on the phone before he comes back for the next stage of the plan to be initiated. You know, you just kind of have folks taking these detours away from like, I know there's these grand political games being played, but I really just want to go run away with my girlfriend, you know? But mommy has other plans.
Yes, because we see that she is, at the same time, this Representative Jordan, who is like her rival, she's basically jockeying for his support for her husband's nomination, and he will not give it to her. So we see that she calls her son, tells him play a game of solitaire, and then tells him to kill Senator Thomas Jordan. And we also heard earlier on when he's getting programmed that anyone who witnesses his deeds he must also kill. Which that was fucked up. So,
that's another instance where there's one of those extreme soft focus where somebody like his body, the senator's body is in the foreground,
and then the daughter comes around it's good. So he goes to his house to assassinate and does, and you kind of think it's over, and then the daughter in that shot that Hal's talking about pops up in the background, and thus recalling the order that you must kill any like collateral damage. He immediately shoots and kills his own wife under the like delusion and the spell or whatever. Yeah, that was fucked up. I did not see that part coming. Yeah,
I think it needed to have that big explosion, right? Like there's a lot of pieces moving into place throughout the movie, and we hadn't really had a significant moment of all those things combining explosively and like the consequences of it. So,
and just for that character too, I feel like something extreme needed to happen to break him from his mother's like grasp, because even though he doesn't get along with his mom or doesn't even respect her, I feel like he has in the past felt helpless to not go along with her every word. So like her effective indifference to his wife and ultimately leading to her death, I think, is finally what probably breaks him, along with Sinatra's forced deck. Which, listen, as a guy who likes a little bit of a up close magic, it's not really what a forced deck is.
Sinatra makes a deck that every single card in it is a queen of diamonds.
Yeah. Which a forced deck is like, you got a few cards in there and you know how to make them appear at the top. Or
not every
not
card.
Just every card with a queen of diamonds.
Every card is the same. It's not really sleight of hand, right? Like, that's brute force.
David Blaine has got all aces of spades in the deck. It's not as cool. But yeah, so Sinatra figures all this out, that solitaire is the like key to trigger a sequence, and then comes at him with a deck of all queens. I do like that scene where he's just
he just pulls pulls them out one by one,
getting all the information out of them by just flipping queens over. And we see that he like tries his best to deprogram Shaw and kind of tell him like, I forgot what is the phrase that he tells him. Do you remember what it is when he has the like deprogramming conversation? Because he kind of just leaves him to see what will happen, to see if it worked or whatever. So yeah,
he's got to get back to Janet Leigh,
Yeah, of course. I mean, don't we all? And then we have the climactic sequence at the convention where he goes up to the box with a rifle in a little case. Okay. I always like in movies when guns are in like little cases and we get to see them.
And they have to assemble them
put
all.
them together. That movie, The American, with George Clooney. Did you ever see that one?
Yes.
I like that a lot.
Or I was thinking of The Killer.
The Killer,
the recent Fincher.
Yeah. I love a little gun assembly sequence. And he gets his gun, his rifle, and has it trained on the president or the president to be, and at the last moment switches it up and kills his stepdad and his little mommy. And then himself, which was fucked up. Right.
That's I think this movie is like punctuated by unexpected bursts of violence. Or maybe the bursts aren't unexpected, but the way they're directed, like to whom they are directed, is a bit of surprising or misdirection, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Keeps the suspense built.
Yeah. So I want to talk about some of the themes, specifically the idea that I thought this was an anti-communist movie when we started it, and now I don't think so, or at least not in the same sense as I had before.
Yes, I would agree with
it's
the second
not pro-communism.
Right. It's just that is window dressing for a premise, right? Like it is building off of some baseline cultural assumptions that kind of everyone holds to establish a foundation for what comes next, but it's not really about that at all.
If anything, I think it's definitely not pro-communist, like I said, but it is more of a movie about how like political fear-mongering, like how cynical it is that the same people who will scream communist from the mountaintops are the same ones who are using those to their advantage when they can,
are actually either collaborating with or are using the same tactics. Because that's something that we didn't mention, but Senator Iceland, the stepfather of Sergeant Shaw and the husband of Angela Lansbury's character, is doing McCarthyism.
Yeah, he's like
he repeatedly. Yes, in fact, one of my favorite shots in the movie is when he's on the news and it's being shot from multiple. Or I guess is he doing a press release or a press conference maybe, and it's depicted on the television, on different televisions from different vantage points. Was really cool visually.
Just like communicating the like how wide and far his like fear-mongering is spreading to people.
And then also it's all fictional, it's all fabricated because it's just like him. It's so empty. It's just like him by himself grandstanding, and there's a funny bit there where McCarthy had said in that speech that I referenced earlier to the West Virginia and Women's Republican Club, he had accused 205 Department of
Defense or Justice?
Of State, excuse me.
Okay.
The Department of State is the real thing.
Because in the movie, it's the
Department of Defense. Department of State. And so there's a reoccurring bit that builds to quite a head in that scene in particular, where Senator Iceland is changing numbers. He just said, he's like 205, 17, 1,000.
And then Angela Lansbury, very funny later on, is like, she says something like, just decide on a number or something like that.
No, he asks her to decide on a number because he's confused.
And just looks stupid. Like he has enough awareness to realize, like, listen, if I'm going to play this game, I at least need to have like a cohesive story to tell people. And
then she points out that her strategy is, if you change the number every time, then what the newspapers ask is, what is the number, not is it accurate?
Damn,
is this real?
Honestly,
in the first place, right?
Honestly, that's pretty prescient to like now and the age of like misinformation. Not to sound like a NPR thing, but yeah, I think it is pretty prescient in that way. Yeah,
for sure. Well, and that's why I think this movie is definitely anti-communist, but I think it is anti-communist in a ambiently American, like mid-20th century American way, and is more of a like tongue-in-cheek satire about power in the media, and the communists are kind of like the villains that are easiest to draw on, rather than it being like
they're a plot device essentially. I think the movie's more about the American political and media machine or whatever, and how they use that shit. But yeah, it was
Yeah. And the thing that I will point out about the end that like made me laugh, where I was like, what are we even doing here, is that the whole thing in the movie, right, at the end, prior to Sergeant Shaw killing his mother, she has actually like beat and straight up says that she has defeated Stalin, and Mao, because she's going to now take the plan into her own hands, and she's not actually collaborating with them. This has been her plan all along, so she can be secretly in power, standing behind the president, and she doesn't give a fuck about them. So I was like, it's giving communist as plot device rather than genuinely held anti-communist sentiment, because at the end of the day, authoritarian American mommy defeats Stalin.
Hell yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And I think it's like,
what in the Freud?
I think it's also just really good example of like politicians don't give a fuck about the shit that they're trying to scare people with.
Right.
It's all like I think this movie does a really good job of exploring like the cynicism and like political fear mongering. Basically, they're like, dang, those two aren't scared of fucking communists. There's not 1 second where they're actually afraid of a communist. They're just clearly using it to their own ends.
Right. It's all about like using it as a tool for what is most politically expedient at any given moment.
I do want to ask, have you seen the Jonathan Demme remake, the 2004 one?
I have not. I had not seen any iteration of this prior to watching this.
I saw it a long time ago, and I remember liking it, and I just read a synopsis on it to remind myself some of it, because I remember stuff being different. First off,
isn't Denzel in it?
It's Denzel Washington is the Frank Sinatra character.
Interesting.
Meryl Streep is the Angela Lansbury, and Liev Schreiber is the Shaw.
And Demme directed this?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll watch this later today.
It's after Desert Storm. I think it does the wise thing, which is not to try to use like, any. It is definitely not trying to make it like Al Qaeda or any that. Those are not the bad guys. Instead, it is like a global corporation that has their hands in pulling the strings in various like. It's just a capitalist organization that has their hands in pulling the strings in various countries to bring people to power, are the ones who program him.
Okay.
And the other major difference is there's no stepfather character. It's Liev Schreiber is the one who's running for office when he comes back from the war. Okay,
so it's just directly plugging in.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, they do still have that like contentious mother-son relationship. But she's the one that like spearheading his campaign and all that, and he's like actively running for office. Yeah, I remember it being pretty good. I want to rewatch it because I haven't seen it in forever. But
it does. It sounds like there is the common theme, like as it relates to the older one that carries through of like the political dressing.
Yeah.
Is a way of setting the scene, but actually is not part of the really a robust message that's like, being communicated.
Other than the message of like politicians are fucking bloodthirsty, I guess is the, like that's the connecting tissue. But I remember it being pretty good, and it's Jonathan Demme.
And it's I'm always here for Demme.
Well, before we move on, do we have anything else we want to say about the Manchurian Candidate?
No, I heard a rumor that you were going to talk about some Armond White.
Yeah, I did try to find if Armond White liked this, and the most I could find was that I don't think he understood it on a blurb I found about something else. But I did realize that we never talked about Armond White's 2023 Better Than list, which has some doozies in it. For anyone that doesn't know, his Better Than list, because he's Armond White and like everything has to be a competition, he, instead of putting out like a top 10 list at the end of every year, he puts out a Better Than list, which is essentially like his chance to really flex his contrarian muscles, because he always picks movies that are like beloved that year that he thinks sucks, and then picks some weird shit that he says is better than. He doesn't have that many like. There is one that to be fair, I never saw this one, but there is one that I was like, holy shit, he must be the only one that liked it. But his Better Than list is pretty funny. So would you like to hear some of his Better Thans for 2023?
Yes.
His first one, John Wick is better than Oppenheimer. Which usually he tries to find some sort of connective tissue of like how those two are related. And this year especially, it's like there's nothing. So here's a little something that he wrote about it that I thought was funny. He said, Chad Stahelski climaxed the Keanu Reeves cult franchise, which we don't know what the meaning of the word cult is because that is not a cult movie, with the year's most visually kinetically thrilling film craft. Movement is the perfect antidote to Christopher Nolan's no fun talkathon. I love that he hated Oppenheimer because it was too chatty. It's like this goddamn movie about just building an atomic bomb.
Watch people fall downstairs and shoot. And I say that as a John Wick lover, but
yeah, no shade on John Wick. It's just so funny to compare the two and be like, I like John Wick better because there's not as much talking. Now, this is the one that really made me laugh, even though I hadn't seen it. But it seems the reason he compared the two is quite obvious and quite stupid. But he said, Rebel Moon, the Zack Snyder movie, is better than Killers of the Flower Moon, and I honestly believe the only reason he put it on there is because they both have moon in the title. But then he says something crazy, which is that he said that Martin Scorsese succumbs to America's current self-loathing in his first political film. Right? So
what?
Apparently this is Martin Scorsese's first political film. So Taxi Driver, Casino, Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know, man.
The King of Comedy, I think is like pretty.
Yeah. Crazy. Have you ever heard of a movie called Winter Boy?
No.
A movie called Winter Boy came out last summer, which he said is better than May December, which listeners will remember we both loved. But the funny thing he wrote about this was that Winter Boy bests another dishonest Todd Haynes academic thesis, this time indulging pedophilia as social defiance. Which, again, does he not watch?
I'm surprised that he hasn't been hit in the head by a point rocketing past it.
Right. It's so crazy how much he... Okay, well, if those were three ridiculous ones, here's one that I have a little bit of respect for. First, I want to say the movies he didn't like that he's going to compare the one that he did to, which is his final point is that Oppenheimer, Killers of the Flower Moon, and Barbie are all worse than Thanksgiving, which shouts out. Hell yeah, he loved Thanksgiving. He said Eli Roth has made the first...
Does he know who he is anymore? I'm so confused.
Also, Eli Roth has made the first movie to evoke January 6th, not shying away from how national chaos was distorted and misunderstood by mainstream corporate media. Brash, hilarious Roth satirizes American self-destruction, leaving Nolan, Scorsese, and Gerwig with moral and ideological blood on their hands. Which, respect for the Thanksgiving love, but I think maybe...
Moral and ideological blood
on their hands. That's just Armand talking shit because he knows his readers aren't gonna.
I can't tell if that's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
It is stupid.
Or also I worked out immediately before coming here and haven't really eaten, and I'm just my brain synapses are not firing at the appropriate rate, and I'm like, what?
Man, his lists this one didn't have as many bangers of Jack and Jill is better than I don't know whatever the fuck a Phantom Thread or whatever that was that year, but the Thanksgiving being better he grouped that as all normally it's this movie is better than this movie. This one is Thanksgiving is better than Oppenheimer, Killers of the Flower Moon, and Barbie, which I like every one of those movies. I just think first off it's just funny to construct a list that way, that a better than list.
It's also I think so frequently with this version of his writing, it's like you said, usually you're trying to identify some common thread. Who is I was down to watch a 2-hour movie about basically pop feminism and Barbie, and instead I'm gonna watch a slasher. Those things are not fungible, right? They don't replace each other.
It's woke movies. He's going after woke movies. The Majority Report, they point out a lot that anti-woke crusaders are basically doing the social justice warrior thing that they claimed that they hated for so long, that just being there's a girl in my Marvel movie now. And
I hate it.
Yeah, which is that is the phase that he's in, is he's just social justice warrioring for anti-woke shit.
Tumblr was a mistake for all of us.
But oh God, I love him. He's the best. But anything we want to add before we close this one up?
I don't think so. We already mentioned what we're gonna cover next time,
Hell
so
yeah.
we'll see y'all on the flip side in a couple of weeks. And
Yeah.
also just say we'll put the, of course, sources in the
Yep.
tweets and whatnot. But if you haven't before, I mean, all the time I'm like, go on Marxist.com. But if you go on not .com. I don't know what's there. .org. Marxists.org. If you go there, there are all kinds of like 20th century and some going into the 21st century, but lots of 20th century like socialist publications. Like traditionally I've gone there to be like, oh, let me read this like Lenin speech, right?
Yeah.
But there are all these scans of like primary sources of like what socialists were writing at the time, and
That's cool.
it was fun to read through
Yeah.
them
Hell yeah.
for writing the beginning part of this. So
Yeah.
you should
Well,
do that too.
And I shall post all in the show notes section. So,
Hell yeah.
but yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye.
Kill the poor.